lot to memorize or go through. And thank you everyone for making extra time to attend this session. This is Friday afternoon, 3 p.m. Your finals coming. I know it's a lot, so I give you a special appreciation. I'm from Northern Arizona University, and just like it was introduced, I do research on speech production and perception and L2 intelligibility. Brief acknowledgement about my collaborators, students, and sponsors. I'm going to start with the speech constructs. I'm a speech person, so I do anything related to speech, whether it's going to be language acquisition, social bias, assessment, AI, technology, anything related to speech, I do. So I'm going to go with constructs first, and some research and future direction. Okay, so L2 speech. Has anyone attended, what was it? The last Saturday there was a conference at SNU. Did anyone go there? Couple, two, three, four. Okay, that's good. Well, there's 3-4 slides overlapping. Otherwise, it's going to be pretty new. So I'll try to introduce some new research studies that I've been doing and some issues as well. I got to discuss this a little bit with Dr. Lee. I heard here many of you are doing linguistics and education and literature, like all of these disciplines being combined, right? So today's talk can be pretty broad and comprehensive, so that at least one of these many topics can fit in your future research area. L2 speech can be defined by how speakers perceive, process, understand, and pronounce the sound of a second language. But here my interest is especially on perception and production, perception in between. We're going to talk about the understanding of that. Here, linguistically speaking can be subdivided. It says subdivided into linguistic and functional. When it comes to linguistics, we can say fluency, pronunciation, lexical grammar, all of these linguistic features, right? I do speech analysis by using speech samples, which will include pronunciation features, of course, but then lexical and grammatical features as well. So I do that. And then pragmatic function, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later. Are we familiar with these speech constructs? How many of us? Have you heard of these 3 constructs? Yes? Who else? Maybe you too? They're from NAU actually. They are our PhD students. They're visiting Korea, but they had an opportunity to take me to this university, so they helped. In the field of second language speech, we use these constructs quite distinctively, which means if you mess this up, you are in trouble. You can't really publish papers. Reviewers and experts are very, very particular about how you are using these constructs. First, comprehensibility is defined by how easy it is to understand an utterance. It's an easy of understanding. So if you are listening to a speech file, an accented speech, then if it's really hard and you're making an extra effort, you can say it's not comprehensible. Accentedness is more like a difference. How different is your speech from someone else's speech in that particular speech community? It's a phonological difference. Intelligibility is the one that I've been interested in, is pretty much to what extent, how much the listener actually understands the intended message. In fact, I mentioned Dong-Monroe 2005, 2015, these whole construct distinctions happened based on Dong-Monroe's 1995, 1997, 1999, their seminal work, showing that these constructs are all independent. Although, in the past, when you say, oh, you have an accent, that means I don't understand you. In the past, accentedness, proficiency, or fluency, we all used these terms interchangeably, but not anymore. So this is a big accomplishment. However, I'm going to bring up an issue related to these constructs, because that has been my recent interest. So when Dewing and Monroe, by the way, they both retired. Tracy Dewing retired 3 years ago. I mean, they are leading scholars in the field of second language speech. Murray Monroe retired last year. When they first defined these constructs, of course, when you have a construct means you find a way to measure or operationalize that concept. That is a construct. Otherwise, it can be another concept, right? So because these are constructs, they use the specific ways to measure them. Comprehensibility was measured by using a 9-point scale. Like 1, not comprehensible at all. 9, easy to, very comprehensible, or very difficult to understand, easy to understand. So it's a point scale. Accentedness was the same thing. It was a 9-point scale, very accented, not accented at all. However, intelligibility was measured by using a transcription. You listen to a sentence, you have to transcribe it, and decide how many correct words you ended up transcribing. Of course, the measurement was different, therefore the results were different. So in this case, from 2019, I was interested in revalidating these methods. Like, why are we using an intelligibility only through a transcription? So the first one is a traditional way. Second, I introduced a nonsense statement. I noticed when you are transcribing a sentence, the context of the sentence gives you so many clues. So let's say you are listening to a sentence, my stomach was so bad, or let's say because I was sick, I didn't go to school. If you hear sick, then didn't, you sort of guess the rest of the words. Or the functional words you can easily guess, right? So I was interested in removing the contextual, semantic connection, contextual information. So you can say your slide clock may slip on your discourse, like nothing makes sense. In this case, you really have to listen to the sentence and each sound very carefully. This was, in fact, a very effective way, although it was the most difficult way of measuring intelligibility. It was pretty successful. This was published in Language Learning 2019. True false is not this is the one that I created, but this one was already out there available, even by Dewing and Monroe 1995. If intelligibility is just based on your understanding, why do we even bother using a transcription method? Rather, let's just check the understanding of it. So let's say elephant has 2 legs. Then you know, oh, that's false. But you understood the sentence. So you're just checking the true-false aspects only. Scalar judgment is the one that I created, which I still believe, that maybe if intelligibility and comprehensibility are really different, if we're using a similar measurement approach, they are still supposed to be independent. Does that make sense? That's what I wanted to test out. Again, intelligibility was a transcription approach. Comprehensibility is a scalar judgment. That's why I thought we have 2 independent results. What if we are taking the similar approaches, right? So that's what I tested. And I'm going to explain this more on the next slide. Filtered is something that me and Ron Thompson created as well. This is the same idea, like elephant has 2 legs. Then I'll say elephant 2 So we are manipulating the sounds by removing the rest of the segmental aspects. So only maintaining the prosodic part and then targeting at the content words. Mostly these are all determined by the transcription. Basically, I've tried to introduce all of these approaches and new measurements and looked at the relationships with the listeners' comprehension scores. So that's the approach. This is something I want to share. So if you look at this orange, intelligibility sentence, and then all the way there, phrase intelligibility. This is both transcription method. One thing I found out is if we are transcribing only 2-3 words as a phrase versus transcribing an entire sentence with maybe 10-12 words, results only 40% correlation. It's already different. How about this one? It's an intelligibility rubric, and then here is an intelligibility sentence. So even though it's the same intelligibility, but if you are changing the method, the correlation is only 0.7, although it's all intelligibility. What is also fascinating is the red part. This is the comprehensibility. Com means comprehensibility, and then this is in means intelligibility. We are using the same scalar judgment. In other words, from 1 to 9 point scale. Even though these are different constructs, correlation is pretty high. Why? Because we are using the same scalar approach, the point system. These are all done by 30 expert raters, which means they already have a teaching experience. I mean, in the field of second language speech, defining expert raters is hard as well. Like, who is expert? Usually how we define is you have a teaching experience, you have a linguistics background, then you get trained for each of these constructs. So those are all mostly my grad students, have done this numerous times. So they understand what comprehensibility means versus what intelligibility means. But because we use the same measurement method, the correlation is that high. So that's an implication. That's the paper we are working on. So my point here is you as a researcher, if you're doing any type of research like this, you must choose your right measurement method. This is just the same idea. You see a nice relationship, like a linear relationship, because I used this kind of a scalar, even rubric approach. One for comprehensibility, one for intelligibility. But still, the relationship is pretty strong, which is not good, which is actually going against the Doingen-Monod's 1995 definition. So this is a new paper that I'm working on, and I think the field needs to change. I mean, once new theory comes out, 30 years later, another new theory should come out, right? So this is something that we are thinking about. This is another new intelligibility measure that I worked with my PhD student. We kept thinking, like, what would be the best way to measure the intelligibility? Intelligibility is the understanding, right? So here, we play the 30-second sound files, and raters gonna listen to the sound files. Then they get to stop at the point where they have a problem. So it's a continuous measure that is more of a response time approach. We didn't get to publish this, but we have some data for that. This one is some of you, especially in the speech pathology department or linguistics department, might be interested. This is an automated intelligibility scoring approach. Most common is Levenstein's distance measure. Basically, it's based on the transcription. So I'm going to share what we got based on this. So let's say you have water. Water is the input. I mean the standard model, water. But then your input, non-native speaker, is water. So this is based on transcription, like I said. So you see W is correct, but T got replaced by Y. E got replaced by You see that differences? So you basically count the number of differences or deviations. And the higher number, the worse it could be, right? So this is faster though. Nowadays, you can see a lot of free automatic transcription tools. So they're going to transcribe your speech pretty accurately. And then you just add some coding to create these additional scores. And this is what we got. We used the fuzzy string, the Bosker's model, and then the human intelligibility scores versus that actual automated score. We got 0.07 correlation. So I'm going to introduce this again later because we needed a certain automatic approach to produce a quick feedback response to our users. But again, if you have a vast number of speech files, then this automatic approach is handy, very, very quick. So something that you could think about. Okay, let's move on to accent briefly. I'm sure the definition of accent here in Korea might be different from the concept of accent that we have in North America. But I don't know how many of you have heard about these issues. So accent, as you can see, is all days. When people want to distinguish or decide whether you're from my tribe or from another tribe, they must have some kind of way to decide, right? So in this case, they used palatal fricative sh and versus alveolar fricative s. So once they, caught a refugee like that, and then will ask, pronounce shibboleth. And they are supposed to pronounce shibboleth. But depending on how your muscle practice, was used, some people don't know how to pronounce this she, right? So they will say shibboleth. Then they knew you're not from my tribe, and they cut your neck, like chop your neck right away, and they killed on the spot. So 42,000 people were killed that way, historically speaking. So this is the fact. So accent was such an issue. It is an issue still in many countries, just like this. Boat patrol, these officers, they could just listen to someone's speech and say, oh, you're not from our country. But they don't really have a phonetic trainings either. So this is a huge problem. Accent is problematic, not just for the linguistics purpose, but social, psychological purpose. This is another one. This is another big issue. Was first introduced by Lippiger in 2012 book. So if you look at these characters, what do you guess? What do you come up with? These are villains or funny characters, right? They all have accents. Do you agree? But these princesses or prince, they don't have an accent. So in the States, this became a big problem. I think now Disney is moving in this direction too much. So now everything is different there. But what was problematic in the past was little kids were trained with this direction that if you have an accent, you're not good. All the good people are not supposed to have an accent. So the stereotype they're growing up with is much stronger than they can ever imagine. But of course, we all have an accent, and the issue difference is not deficit. Accent, I'm sure many of you have already heard of Lavov social linguistics variations, or even acculturation theory. Accent is far more than the linguistic trait, if you think about it. Sometimes people maintain their accent to what? To demonstrate their identity. I mean, this is an English accent, but if you think about the Korean dialect, perhaps, right? In this case, if you don't want to integrate into a new culture, you intentionally keep distance, right? In that case, you're not going to follow the target accent at all. This one, accent is dynamic. It means accent can modulate as speakers negotiate social identifications. So, again, many of you might have heard communication adaptation theory. We change our speech pattern. I mean, if you think about yourself, you may too. The way you talk with your mom versus with your boyfriend, with your husband, with your kids. I mean, the way I talk with my kids, I get very probably authoritative. I don't know, but we change. So this is one example that I actually shared at a AAAL a couple of months ago. That I think this whole social justice issue is so big in North America. So I was asked to do a plenary speech at AAAL. AAAL is one of the biggest conferences in North America, American Associations for Applied Linguistics. And I feel like the field is moving in this direction a bit too much. But, as an example, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Has anyone ever heard of this person? Maybe some of you. She passed away, but a very, very, very respected figure. As a woman, she was a Supreme Court Justice. Was born in 1933, Brooklyn, a very low middle class family. Some of you might be familiar with the New York low class accent. That's the Lavov's department research study too. But she did not pronounce the R sound in New York. If you are from a lower class background, your speech pattern is also different, right? I mean, as you can tell. So she intentionally tried to pay so much attention to her own speech to make sure to enunciate that R sound, to hide her original background. But then as she established her career, later, I mean, let's say everyone respects her and then, she is secure with her status, she gradually decided to move on with her original accent, which means she did not pronounce the R. That's just one example. So this is just a pattern that how we change our accent. What about our students? Some of you might be interested in the language education part. I talked about the accent issues, intelligibility issues, but then the problem here is doesn't matter how researchers would argue or the field is moving, our English learners, especially in Korea, because both studies included Korean participants, still prefer an American accent. So this is another issue. This one was first done in 2000. It was published in 2024, but the study was done in 2023. This one is coming out in language assessment quarterly. It was done last year. It's coming out this year. So relatively very new. Both studies. 240 means like 80 Koreans, 80 Chinese, and all of these EFL students. That one also included 40 Korean students. We asked them if you could have a non-native accent but highly intelligible in this high-stakes English proficiency test, how would you feel? How would you feel if you have to take a TOEFL test, but then the listening section has a non-native accent? Would you feel comfortable? Not yet. You see, you're not comfortable. Why? Why are you not comfortable?
I'm used to
American accents?
Yes.
Would you feel pretty upset?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly so. Many test takers, especially Korean test takers and Chinese test takers, they were pretty upset about including the non-native varieties. So that's the reality. So it's much to think about. We talk about this standard language ideology all the time, right? I'm sure here in the States, in Korea, we get to talk about this issue too. How can you even define the standard English? And in fact, when you ever want to publish papers in journals such as like Applied Linguistics, Language Journal, Language Learning, or TESOL Quarterly, all of these journals, if you start to use the term standard English, reviewer is going to be really mad. We are very specific about the terminologies. So you should say prestigious language or inner circle varieties. You can have all different terms, right? But the issue is because we don't know how to define the standard English anymore. So that's something how the field is changing, at least in the field of applied linguistics. Why? Because ownership is changing. Now we talk about the global intelligibility. So in the past, I joined Northern Arizona University in 2008. In 2009, the first class I offered was called World Englishes. Then our US undergrad students had to take it. And they were very mad at the time. Like, we speak English. English is my native language. Why should I even take a class like this? But then now it's 2024. People appreciate it. I think the world has changed. Because, if they want to come to Korea, then, they may as well know how Korean people speak English, what speech patterns they have. People want to travel. People want to identify the differences. So I think it's a good thing now. All right, then let's move on to listener variability. We talked about the concept of intelligibility. Now I'm going to move on to listener variability. After this is going to be intelligibility speech patterns. I talk about this book whenever I have a chance to start the speech perception issues. The sense considered as a perceptual system. In this book, perceptual system is all interrelated. Perception is knowledge of the environment. Basically what it says is when we perceive a sound, we often think that we rely on our ear, but our decision is based on everything. Your eyes, your previous experience, your sense, right? Your feeling sometimes. Like if you like someone and you like that voice, regardless of that person's speech itself, you might just like it. You might get to understand that person so well. So the perception is not just one sensory direction. This one shows how unreliable our ear is. If we do a spectrogram analysis, this is a visualizations, you can see this is a D, alveolar stop. This is a G, is a velar stop. Both of them, as you can see, depending on the following environment, it changes the spectrogram shapes, right? The same thing, the distance, like a formant 1 and second formant, it changes so vastly, like noticeably. But when we hear, it's all D or it's all G. We actually hear as the same sound. So we don't necessarily reflect the real speech properties when we hear. We actually go with what we hear. Sometimes what we think we hear. So I do some research on, again, there are, I'm sure, many other research topics. Today I'm only sharing the ones that I've been doing. Well, I guess that's the benefit of having me. You get to hear what I've been doing, right? I do some research on stereotyping issues. Linguistic stereotyping is pretty much well known since 1960. Brief samples of speech that can be associated with the low prestige groups can cue negative attribution. So sometimes you might have heard like some people just listen to a certain accent and then immediately think, oh, that person probably not intelligent. Oh, so-and-so has an African black accent, maybe not very smart. You start to form your judgments that way without seeing the person, without even knowing the person. Whereas in reverse, this is my advisor, Don Rubin. The person who introduced me also had a degree at the University of Georgia. He was in the speech communication department and the linguistics department. What he introduced was the reverse linguistic stereotyping, which is the opposite to the linguistic stereotyping. Social identity associated to the speaker can evoke linguistic expectancy, which can lead to stereotyped evaluation, which means like you just look at someone and you make a decision about the person without even listening to the person. So I often say, you look at me, and then you can say, oh, she's Asian. And you already, the person introduced me about my background, my research, and then Professor Lee already probably told you about me. So you already had this expectation, but imagine you just got to see me on the street. Well, she's another Korean lady, maybe, who knows, she could speak English or doesn't know Korean. So you can have all kinds of evaluations. In Korea, in the States, let's say Asian woman is perceived as bad drivers. It's a very unfortunate case, but I'm not a good driver either, so I don't know it actually it goes together. Well, you kind of have all kinds of stereotypes, right? Based on your ethnicity, your gender, you know, your first language perhaps. So this is the reverse linguistic stereotyping. This study received a lot of attention, thankfully, not just in the field of academic areas, but in the actual society. It's a similar study. So what we prepared was, we prepared an astronomy lecture, a relatively very difficult concept. Even the grad students could have a hard time understanding. So it was already difficult. It was a 3 to 5 minute lecture. One time the lecture, we prepared 2 lectures. One lecture, both lectures were recorded by a standard American male speaker who has a standard American accent. I'm using a term standard means like pretty expected accent. And if you could hear, it's just American accent. Like it's hard to tell if that person has any kind of variety, characteristics. One time the lecture was played with this face projected on the screen, just like this. So I involved almost 190 students, but I reserved a room like this. And then I basically told my participants, you would be listening to a lecture, etc., etc. Then one time I just showed this face. And then another time I showed this face. Keep in mind, the lecture was prepared by the same speaker. But at the end, when students listened to the lecture with this face on, they thought that the speech had an accent. Everyone thought, well, maybe Yuna knows, this is my husband. But they all thought he's Chinese. Maybe he looks like Chinese, I don't know. So they thought this face, that lecture had an accent. Therefore, they couldn't understand properly. That was a significant effect. Same thing, a few years later, well, maybe American students are so biased or stereotyped based that, they are not good. So I thought, maybe not just American students had those issues. Maybe our international ESL students could have the same problem. So in this case, we prepared these 2 faces. The Korean, Caucasian woman, we targeted at ESL, English learner, international students, about 92 students. Then we prepared a grammar lecture on conditionals. And the lecture was prepared by this speaker who's highly, highly intelligent, very, very proficient. And one time, same idea, the lecture was played with this picture on, the other one. And after that, our ESL students had to take the grammar test. Same thing, significant difference. And in this case, ESL students thought the Korean face, the lecture was too accented that they couldn't understand the lecture. But then when they heard the same thing with this face, they said the lecture was just fine. I mean, maybe it's just one of the American dialect variations, like maybe the professors from, or the teachers from Texas, like they, had their own assumption, but same thing, same results, both American and ESL students. So you can see the stereotype could play a big role. This one, we checked the perception of a grammaticality. Here, first of all, there are many studies on how we even consider the credibility of the speakers based on the speaker's accent. So this is a similar line of that research. We prepared 40 sentences or something like this. John is too stubborn to expect anyone to talk to Bill. His experience showed to be a big advantage. Which one is grammatical, which one is ungrammatical, you think? The top grammatical, or the bottom is grammatical? Or you're not sure? Yeah, well, we intentionally prepared such difficult sentences. Well, according to the textbook, we use the Doug Biber's Longman dictionary. This is ungrammatical, this is grammatical. But it's very hard to tell. Even native speakers had a hard time. So we intentionally prepared sentences like that. Then, same idea. With a Californian accent standard English version, one time we play that with this face, another time that face. Same results. If they listen to the sound files with that face on, they thought a lot of sentences are grammatical. Because you're not sure anyway. Yeah? And then next study, we didn't show the pictures, we only played the sound files, but half of that with a little accent, the other with no accent. Of course, when they heard the sentences with an accented speech, they thought those are ungrammatical. So not only the faces, but the accent, I don't know, all kinds of issues, but people are very biased, regardless of the speech characteristics, right? So this is the reality that I've been talking about. I mentioned how listeners or raters, we are so biased, we are so unreliable, and this probably summarizes that a little bit. This was supported by ETS. We recruited 82 raters or listeners, if you call. We collected their background information and asked them to rate TOEFL spoken responses, the actual TOEFL responses. And then we chose 20 extremely lenient raters, 20 extremely severe raters, that asked them to go through the ETS's rater training session, which took about 8 hours. So it's a long process. Then they had to rate the same speech files again. So that's the process. And then here, this is pre-training. Those 40, let's look at the 40 listeners. You can see around 40 to 50% of the variance of their ratings were determined by these background factors. In other words, when you provide your rating score, 50% of your scores were influenced by the background factors. But after the post-training, it went down to 12%. So training really worked. That's why these testing agencies, they provide a lot of training sessions. And for this reason, some of you may know, before 2005, the TOEFL test wasn't this expensive. I don't know, maybe you didn't have to take the test back then. But in those days, it was significantly cheaper. Now it's twice, maybe almost 3 times, much more expensive. It's because they had to hire raters and they have to train them. The speaking part is extremely difficult. These are factors, I mean, a lot of it, basically saying all of these can affect our judgments. Of course, we looked at the stereotype, but familiarity, your first language, training, all of those really. So when we decide whether someone has an accent or not, it's not just a one decision. It's a combination of everything, right? So this is the point. Okay, I have 2 more sections. This is mutual intelligibility. The next one is future direction. Intelligibility. We already talked about the definitions of it, but here I especially want to mention, actually after this I have intelligibility characteristics. Here I have a mutual intelligibility. This is the concept global intelligibility, the same idea. What I'm doing here is I like to tell the field and to students, to the teachers, or anyone related, when you want to have a successful communication, it's not just the speaker, but the listener also has to take the responsibility. And that's another direction I think the field is moving. So which is good. Since we know communication is a two-way street, right? Which makes sense actually, which is maybe easier said than done, but at least we need to think about how we can train listeners. This is another part that I've been doing for the last 15 years or so, how we can better train listeners. Here, by the way, do you think you can understand accented speech better if you get paid? Of course we are. Yeah, of course we can be paid better. A fascinating study just last year published in Applied Psycholinguistics. Apparently, if you get paid, you understand better on that accented speech. What's even more is if it's going to be performance-based payment. So the more you understand, the more money you make. Then yes, they get so much better instantly. But then we can't do that all the time, right? There are many other ways of training listeners. Some kind of awareness training, explicit instruction on different linguistic features. I've tried some social psychology theories. I also tried with my students some accent familiarity related activities. I'm going to share a couple of studies on this one, social psychology, because this practice seems to be a lot simpler, surprisingly, and faster in effect. So 3 studies I've done. Those studies are pretty well known. Same idea though. I used a concept called the contact hypothesis. So basically, if you and I, we get to spend some good time, then we develop some relationship and you understand my speech better. But when it comes to this contact hypothesis, we have to have a certain conditions. So let's say you and I, we spend an hour, but I'm as a professor and you as a student. The relationship doesn't change that much. An hour can be a waste of time, but it has to have an equal power. So there has to be a certain condition, equal interest, mutual benefits, and all that. Anyway, this is just one example. I introduced some of the contact-based activities to our Anthropology 103 courses at NAU. I don't know here, do undergrad students have to take some anthropology classes as a part of the requirements? Like a liberal arts, something? But at NAU, this is one of the required courses. The class size is pretty big, like 100, 120 students per class. So I used the 2 classes, each class about 100 students. One class control group, so they didn't do anything, but they took the pre-test, post-test, just listening to accented professors' lectures. This one, I gave them a specific contact activities, which means I brought international students to their classrooms. Like they got to do things, and they had coffee and all that good stuff. You can see the significant effect. The one in the circles are the experimental groups. So this actually worked. But this took a lot of time. What's interesting is I did something similar to our ESL students. Those both studies involved students in Beijing, so China. Here we told Chinese students in Beijing the importance of like the bias issue, the global English is like we made things a little more different. And then rather than just teaching American accents, we introduced different varieties. You can see the blue is experimental, the top one, the triangle is experimental. They improved much better. Here improvement means when they listen to the non-native accents for their listening test, their performance was better. So this worked for the EFL students as well. The last one is a cognitive dissonance theory. This one I think is quite promising. Have you heard of this term? Dissonance? It's from the social psychology. Dissonance means something uncomfortable, right? So in this case, let's say you smoke. Then we keep telling you smoking is bad, it's gonna affect your lung, like why do you smoke? It's gonna be really bad. Like we just talk about something bad in relation to that particular activity, then you feel, oh maybe maybe it's not going to go good for me. Like you get to think about it, right? So same idea to our undergrads, 105 students. Usually our PhD students, when they start our PhD program, they have to teach 105 classes. 105 is our composition class for undergrad students, freshmen. So they all have to take this. So here what we've done is we told our freshman undergrad students having an accent bias is bad. If you don't understand non-native accent, you're not cultured, you're not educated. Like we kept telling them how bad it is to have an accent bias or like a linguistic bias. And then a week later, they had to, before and after, we asked them to do the pre-test, post-test. And you can see this is a control group. This is an experimental group. Comprehensibility, I introduced the concept. Speech evaluation improved. Their attitude also improved. So the point here is it's not that difficult to change our perspectives if we intentionally do something about it. So I'm not sharing a video clip, but I shared that last Saturday. We even created a video clip for students, our freshman students, so they could watch why we have to think about this global intelligibility and all of that. So I guess our effort is try to change our perspectives, not just in the classrooms, but outside, everywhere. Anyway, so this is an effort. The point here is communication is two-way street. This is more of the summary. Okay, so now characteristics of intelligible speech. This is another area that I've done for many, many, many years. Don't you want to know what makes your speech so accented or intelligible? When I first studied a PhD program, which is like 20 some odd years ago, the person, I had to teach undergrad capstone class, second language acquisition. And still I wasn't American back then. I lived in New Zealand, so I was an international student still. But they had to decide whether my English was good enough. So there was several stages of interview. Then I still remember one professor told me that, wow, your super segmental use is very natural, which I didn't understand. The person didn't even say whether my pronunciation is good or bad. The person said, oh, your super segmental use is very natural. So obviously, when someone is speaking, you have your perception, right? But then somehow my intonation was used much better than maybe my segmentals. I don't know. But I started to wonder. And then, I had a speaking test, and I didn't think my speech was that intelligible. I know I have an accent. But then every time I took the speaking test, I got a perfect score. But then still the raters were saying, I know you have an accent, but why do you have a perfect score? So that brought me to this issue that there must be a thing that could characterize my speech, but still you find my speech intelligible, right? So I actually had this interest in early on. Of course, many factors can affect your speech. This is a speaker background factors. We know motivation, aptitude, and anxiety. The reason that I'm sharing this is because I think, to me at least, motivation is the #1 factor that changes our pronunciation. What do you think? If you really want to change your accent, you change. I had a student who had a beautiful British accent. She's from Turkey. She was a Turkish. She had a perfect British accent. Came to NAU as a PhD student. Then said, oh, I'd like to have an American accent. I just had a boyfriend, and I'd like to speak like my boyfriend. In 3 months, she had